amendments in TDS provisions and its practical issues. And to talk to us about this, we have a very learned speaker with us, CA Prachi Parekh from Mumbai. May I request the Vice Chairman of Ernakulam branch, CA KV Jose, to welcome the speaker as well as the guests for the day. Over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Most respected speaker for this Saturday morning, CA Prachi Parekh, and our Secretary of Ernakulam branch, CA Diba Varghese, and other MC members and senior members and friends in CA profession. A warm good morning to each one of you. And as usual, today, Saturday morning, of course, and towards the end of September. Normally, we will be busy towards the end of the September, but this year there are a lot of relaxation in the sense extending the dates of income tax, extending the date of MCA, and also extending the period of UDIN taken by our members from 15 days to 60 days. It's all make all of us a little bit relaxed in September towards this end of the September month. And I hope everyone is busy otherwise with the income tax audit and the finalization of accounts. And today we have a very important topic, TDS provisions and its practical issues. And today I read in paper that from April 1st to September 22nd, the total direct tax collection net of refund is coming around 5,70,000 crores, which is more higher than 24% pre-COVID period, and which says the collection what we calculate now is through the advance tax or the TDS. So TDS, if you look at the overall tax collection per year, and the TDS portion is coming more than 50% to the TDS route. That means that much important is the TDS provisions. And if we look at the various provisions of if you not comply with TDS provisions like interest, disallowance, penalty, even prosecution, which shows that it's a very, very important provisions. And today we have a CA Prachi Parekh, a very learned speaker, joining us from Mumbai on these recent developments in TDS provision. I'm sure this will be a wonderful learning hours for all of us, and I wholeheartedly welcome CA Prachi Parekh to this seminar. Welcome, madam. And I also welcome all the MC members who is attending, Diba and all others who is attending. I welcome to this virtual seminar. And my dear senior members and friends, I welcome each one of you to this webinar on the recent amendments. So thank you. Have a wonderful learning hours. Over to you, Deepa.
Thank you, Joseph. It's my pleasure to introduce a speaker for the day, CA Prachi Parekh from Mumbai. Madam is a chartered accountant and a law graduate specializing in the area of direct taxation, advisory, and consultancy. She's been engaged in teaching taxation to CA inter and final students for the last 12 years. She's also a consultant with Tax Sutra. CA Prachi is a regular speaker at various forums for professionals and a regular contributor to journals of BCAs, that is Bombay Chartered Accountants, Chamber of Tax Consultants, and Taxman Online. She did her articleship with B.A. Khare and Company and is an amateur artist in leisure times. If I may put it in Malayalam, madam, Visrama Velakal Anandagaramaakan Padam Varikkalana Pani. That is to make your leisure times more enjoyable, you draw. And that's a Malayalam movie quote, ma'am. So all our participants would know that. So with these words, may I welcome CA Prachi Parekh to commence her session. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you for the kind words, and it is my great pleasure to connect with the Ernakulam branch of ICAI. So I've never been south, So at the outset, I express my regards to all the office bearers of the branch and the dignitaries and the participants, seniors in the profession. So one advantage of this COVID pandemic has been that I have been to so many places around India, which maybe otherwise I wouldn't have actually been to. And this is, I would say, my debut in South India region. So I hope it goes well. And I welcome all the participants. I would now just share the screen for my presentation for the day. So let us begin with the session for the day. As we all know, TDS provisions under the income tax have really been very tedious ever since their introduction. The compliance or the other requirements with regards to deductibility and then payment of the taxes, etc. But for a long period of time, these provisions were always neglected in the statute. So, when we were studying, or maybe till 2007-8, there were never many instances of too many amendments coming on in the TDS chapter, which is Chapter 17B of the Income Tax Act. But over the last few years, this particular mechanism of withholding taxes seems to have caught the government's attention. And because of that, we have constantly over the last couple of years been seeing some or the other path-breaking amendment, I would say, in this particular set of provisions, which has really taken a very big impact. Of course, like Sir said, it's helped in improving the collections as well. But apart from that, as professionals, it has made it has almost become mandatory for us to keep pace with the changing dynamics of withholding taxes. So for today's session, before I begin, I would like to place my acknowledgements on record to Taxman Publications, Google, and Tax Sutra, because unless we have such robust search engines, it is not possible to prepare the content for the seminars. So today's coverage in terms of what is going to be taken up in the next few hours, we are going to cover certain important amendments which have taken place, let's say from September 2019, right up to what has become effective from the month of July. So I'll be covering important aspects of 194M and 194N, which now though we have got used to, there are some developments in these sections which all of us should be aware of. Then we touch upon 194O, which is TDS in the context of e-commerce operators. 194 dividend, that's just a small consequential amendment. Certain smaller amendments with regards to introduction of 194P. Then there are some changes to 194C and 194J, which I would be just revisiting. And then the what do you say, the showstopper for the day would be naturally 194Q, which is effective from 1st July 2021, which is TDS in respect of purchase of goods, coupled with 206C1H, which is TCS on sale of goods. We're going to see the interplay between these two sections. And then to close it, we would be visiting 206AB, which is higher TDS in case of non-filers of return of income. So this is my coverage, and in the rightmost column, I have put up the applicable dates just for ease of reference. So let us begin with section 194M as such. So we all know that we have sections like 194C, which is TDS in the context of contractors, or professional fees under 194J in statute for quite some time. But those particular provisions do not cover instances where the payments are made for personal purposes. So if I'm appointing a contractor for doing some personal work which is not related to my business, it technically is outside the scope of 194C. Or if I'm an individual or HUF doing business, but my turnover is below the tax audit threshold, even then I am outside the scope of 194C. So to plug in this lacuna with respect to the withholding provisions, 194M was introduced, which states that if there is any individual or HUF who is not required to deduct taxes under the other provisions, that is so as to say 194C, J, H, etc., and he is making any payment to any particular resident in respect of any work which is in the nature of your 194C coverage, that is for supply of labor or carrying out work under any contract, or by way of commission other than insurance commission, including brokerage or fees for professional services, then that person or that payer is under an obligation to deduct tax at source at 5% on the aggregate amount which is being paid if such aggregate amount paid during the year exceeds rupees 50 lakhs. So the threshold here is 50 lakhs, and on the entire amount TDS is required to be made. So 50 lakhs is just the trigger point. If it is 60 lakhs, you're going to deduct TDS on the entire 60 lakhs component. Now, just to bring out some finer aspects of this section, I have broken it down into 5 simple illustrations like case studies to get a practical perspective to the section. So let us take an example wherein Mr. Rahul is an individual and he is making certain payments to a resident contractor. So in the month of August, he is paying, let us say 27 lakhs, and in the month of November, let us say he is paying another 26 lakhs. Right now, we are required to examine the applicability of 194M in certain circumstances. In the first case, we go by what we normally face, that Mr. Rahul is a businessman. Let us say his turnover is beyond the threshold specified by 44AB. So in this case, naturally 194C is applicable and we need not look at the provisions for 194M. So here there is no applicability for 194M. In the second instance, let's say this person is a businessman. His books of accounts are not audited in the immediately preceding previous year because his turnover is less than the threshold criteria. And payment is again being made for business purpose. Now, in this particular situation, Mr. Rahul is outside the scope of section 194C because 194C covers payers only who are liable to, or rather I would say whose turnover in the preceding year is crossing the threshold for tax audit. So if you are below that limit, you are not covered by 194C. So in this case, even if the payment is being made for your business purposes, there would be TDS applicability under 194M given the fact that the aggregate amount of payment is in excess of 50 lakhs. So in this particular case, at the rate of 5%, Mr. Rahul will be liable to deduct tax at source in respect of the payments which have been made. Now coming to the third part. Payment is made by this person for certain personal purposes. So it could be a construction contract of a residential house or some ANC contract for a non-business purpose, something like this, or it could be any other contract which has nothing to do with his business or profession. Now, once it is not related to business, 194C is not applicable at all. And yet, if the amount which you're going to pay to the contractor is in excess of rupees 50 lakhs, then under these provisions, you would now be required to make TDS at the rate of 5% on the entire amount once the threshold criteria is met. So this is how 194M is actually brought in to take care of what was excluded from the purview of sections 194C, J, I, H, etc. Now let us come to a very peculiar scenario in point number D. Let us say the payer here is a non-resident and he is not having any business income during the year, right? He is making this payment to a contractor and the contract is for personal purposes. So now, you would like to revisit what was the residential status of payer in terms of section 194M. Now, as we read the provisions briefly, there was no stipulation as regards the residential status of the payer. Only what was specified was that the payee ought to be a resident and then the particular provisions of 194M will be applicable. So even if the payer here is a non-resident and he is making certain payments which are covered in the scope of 194M, he would be liable to deduct tax at source because there is no particular exclusion in place as far as a non-resident payer is concerned. So let us say an NRI visits India and he has some plot of land where he is constructing a row house or he is maybe just repairing his existing bungalow, and the amount which he's paying to his civil contractor is in excess of 50 lakh rupees, he would still be required to deduct tax at source in this particular case and remit it to the government within the stipulated time, irrespective of the fact that he is a non-resident, and also irrespective of the fact that he does not have any business income or professional income in India. So this is one aspect. Now the next important aspect of this section which I would like to highlight is this section does not also state that the payment which is being made has to be made out of taxable income. Correct? So the point which I'm trying to make is, suppose this person who's a payer has some exempt income. So as to say, let us say he's an agriculturalist and he's doing really well. So most of his agricultural income would be exempt under 10(1), right? So as such, there is no direct tax liability as far as his agricultural revenue is concerned. Still, if he is complying with the conditions of Section 194M, if he is making a payment to a contractor or a professional which is not otherwise covered in 194C or J, he would be required to deduct tax at source at the rate of 5%, provided the threshold criteria is met. So these were two finer aspects with regards to Section 194M, which I wanted to highlight, and that was the reason we picked up this particular section. So just like the contractor example is covered here, even if it is a lawyer or it is a doctor or any other professional to whom you are paying for your personal purposes, which is unrelated to your business or professional activities, and if the amount is in excess of 50 lakhs, it is necessary to withhold taxes under 194M. So if there are any fees paid to a lawyer for some personal disputes, family issues, etc., and if it is crossing this threshold, one has to keep in mind the applicability of TDS provisions on the same. Now we look at certain compliance related aspects with regards to section 194M. This TDS which is deducted has to be credited to the government within 30 days from the date on which this TDS is made. This remittance has to be electronically accompanied with a challan cum statement in Form 26QD. And then the 16D form is to be delivered to the payee within 15 days from the submission of 26QD. So these are some compliance related requirements which is there. To my mind, the payer doesn't really require to have a TAN number in case of 194M, because even personal nature payments are covered. So it operates just like 194IA, which was with respect to purchase of immovable property. Now let us move on to the next section, which was a very, what I would say, a surprising amendment when it came. It was first introduced in July 19 and it was effective from September 2019. This is TDS in respect of cash withdrawals. So why I say this was a very surprising amendment is because usually we perceive TDS only in the context of any kind of expenditure which has been incurred. So we never really have the logic that withholding taxes should be, considered for incomes per se. And that also incomes which belong to you, on which taxes have already been paid, and what you're doing is merely withdrawing from your own bank accounts. But then in order to keep a tab on what is the withdrawal ratio in excess of 1 crore, etc., they seem to have brought in this particular provision in September 19. Which was again amended by Finance Act 2020, by which a proviso was inserted for non-filers of return of income. So what I have taken up in this slide is only the amendment of 2020, which introduced revised thresholds in the context of people who have not furnished their return of incomes for immediately preceding 3 years. So that is the part of the amendment which I have covered here. Otherwise, the section is usually at 1% TDS in respect of 1 crore. But for people who have not furnished their returns of income for past 3 years, there is a TDS at the rate of 2% which is required to be made if the withdrawals during the year cross the threshold of 20 lakhs, but they are within 1 crore limit. And if at all the withdrawals cross 1 crore, then the TDS is required to be made at the rate of 5%. Now, this is only when the TDS is mandated only when the withdrawal amount is crossing the threshold. So, the withdrawal is less than 20 lakhs per se, even if you are a non-filer of return of income, there is no requirement to deduct TDS as such. Now, here what the proviso says is, let's have a look at it. I'm sure most of us have got acquainted to it, but just in case, to sort of bring out newer aspects of it, provided in case of a recipient who has not filed the returns of income for all the 3 assessment years relevant to 3 previous years, for which time limit to file return of income under subsection 1 of 139 has expired. So this line is what I would just want to emphasize. And then so and so, which is the threshold which I discussed. So just to bring out the provision easily, I have put up this illustration. We need not really go and discuss the numerics of the illustration. It's just there for all of you for reference. But what I have brought out is only on the incremental amount, the rates of TDS has to be made applicable. For example, if you can have a look here, up to let us say 17th November 2021, the aggregate amount of withdrawals was 70 lakhs and it crossed the 20 lakh benchmark in September. So September onwards up to November, any withdrawal which you make would be subjected to a TDS at 2%. Subsequently, there is a withdrawal in the month of January 22 of 45 lakhs, which takes the aggregate withdrawal to 1 crore 15 lakhs. So there'll be a TDS of 2% on such amount which is covering that limit of 1 crore, and on the incremental 15 lakhs, there'll be TDS at the rate of 5%. That's the only point I wish to highlight out of this, and that is just what I wanted to touch upon. So coming to the other aspects over here, now the onus is on the deductor, which is in this case the bank, to evaluate that each of the withdrawers, that is the account holders, have complied with their return filing obligations. So as you can see, the increased rate and threshold is only in the context of non-filers of return of income. So they have come out with a utility. I have just pasted the link in the presentation, which is a utility available to scheduled banks and other payers who come within the ambit of 194N to check the ITR status in bulk mode of all the account holders on the basis of PAN. So then they can accordingly take a call whether TDS has to be made at the usual 1% regime, or you have to apply the amended proviso of 194N. So most of us must have used this utility because we're already 1 year down with its introduction and all. So I think we are comfortable with it. Though practically there have been many instances where people have said that certain banks to be on a conservative mode, they merely end up deducting more TDS without actually checking the return filing status. But then I don't know, if we have an utility, maybe they should really be looking at the rates which are made to be applicable. Now, one point which comes up here is whether this particular proviso which says that the time limit for furnishing return of income under 139(1) has expired. So what happens if an individual or any entity has filed a belated return or a revised return? Right? Would that be considered as non-filing, or would that be taken as return being filed in time? Now, the reference to section 139(1) in the proviso, like we read it, is only with regards to determining as to for which particular year the time limit for filing return has expired. So even if a taxpayer has filed his belated return or a revised return, it would be treated as compliance with filing of return, and his TDS would be done at the usual rates. The 139(1) reference is only to determine whether AY 2021 the date has lapsed, AY 22-23 the date has lapsed, so on and so forth. That is a cutoff, I would say. So yes, belated and revised returns would also be considered to be returns filed for the purpose of 194N. Now, at this point in time, I would just like to update all the participants of one particular practical development. I'm sure all of you must have read about it. The Calcutta High Court has brought in an interim stay on the application of 194N up to 30th of September 2021. So this particular thing, there was a writ petition, I think, somewhere in the month of July, which was heard by the Honorable High Court. And accordingly, someone has challenged this particular section to be unconstitutional, and it has questioned a lot of things. So in that particular jurisdiction, the Honorable High Court has stayed its applicability till the end of this month, and we are all awaiting what will be the outcome of the writ petition, which is soon likely to be disposed by the court. So that was all about 194M and N. Now we move on to some newer provisions of all TDS which have been introduced. And one such provision is section 194O. So section 194O is basically related to TDS in the context of e-commerce operators. So we all know now that online marketing and online purchase and sale of goods has increased manifold, and I would say that this pandemic has certainly been a catalyst in accelerating its growth, because otherwise we all would never have really thought of ordering so many things online in the comfort of your homes. So government rightfully so, and also with regards to the international tax developments which are taking place on the OECD front with regards to taxation of digital economies and all, keeping all those things in line, the Finance Act 2020 introduced a provision on taxability of this e-commerce, withholding tax provisions for e-commerce operators. Now, this is basically a mandate which the e-commerce operator has to comply with. So whenever the e-commerce operator is making any particular payment to an e-commerce participant, subject to fulfillment of certain conditions, he is required to deduct tax at source at 1% on the gross amount of sale or service, or both. So we all know how the e-commerce market or the e-commerce industry functions. There is a very brief illustration I'm taking up in the next few slides, but let us get acquainted with the provisions first per se. So here, usually what happens is you purchase something through the e-commerce operator's digital platform, like it's maybe an Amazon or a Myntra, etc. And you pay online and the product is delivered to you. So there are two aspects here. The payment could directly go to the e-commerce operator, or the payment could directly go to the e-commerce participant. Now, in both the cases, whether the payment goes to the operator or whether the payment goes to the participant, the liability to deduct tax at source is with the operator only. So even though when I'm making an online payment, let us say a vendor, say XYZ, is registered on Amazon, and when I make an online payment, it goes to him. Even though the operator is per se not receiving it, it will be considered as a part of gross sales which have been executed because of the e-commerce operator, and he will be under an obligation to deduct tax at 1% of the gross amount. So that is the functioning of this particular section. So what I'm trying to say is, even if the payment is made directly to the participant, it will be assumed that the e-commerce operator has received the payment. Now, there are certain relaxations which the section provides. So if the e-commerce participant is an individual or HUF, and the gross amount of sale or service or both which is provided is not in excess of 5 lakh rupees, the participant's PAN and Aadhaar has been furnished to the e-commerce operator, then there is no particular requirement to make TDS. So they have given some sort of relaxation to small vendors who are just starting up their business and registering themselves on various e-platforms for relaxation from TDS provisions. Now, these kind of withholding tax provisions are also not applicable if the payment is received or receivable by the e-commerce operator for hosting any advertisements or providing any other services which are not in connection with the sale and services. So if there's anything else which is coming in, the payment is representing, then those amounts are to be excluded from the levy of TDS. Now, these are meanings of certain terms which I have put up, which I would not really go into much detail. Only one aspect I would like to highlight for the interest of participants is the point that when you look at the definition of e-commerce operator, they have covered all persons, or rather all kind of payers, with no specific distinction with regards to whether he or she or it is a resident or a non-resident. All right. But when we are speaking of the definition of the term e-commerce participant, they have covered only residents in the ambit. So just like it was in the case of 194M, there is no stipulation with regards to the residential status of the payer. However, when it comes to the residential status of the payee, even a resident participant is, only a resident participant is covered in the scope. Correct? Fine. Another important aspect is if there are any services which are in the nature of FTS or professional fees which are covered under 194J, then you would have to deduct TDS under that particular section, and you would not actually then come back here. But the meaning which is assigned here is same as is defined in 194J explanation. Now let us look at a small illustration how this section would work. A very basic one. There is a consumer, Mr. A. There is an e-commerce operator, let us say Zomato, and there is a restaurant chain, say Subway. So Mr. A is placing an order and he is making an online payment for ordering a sandwich from the restaurant. So let us say 500 rupees is paid by the consumer to the participant or even to the e-commerce operator. So there'll be TDS required to be made on this 500 rupees at 1% by the e-commerce operator, and you'll have to deposit it with the government within the specified time. So basically all the sales of this restaurant chain Subway, which are executed via the e-commerce operator Zomato for a period, will be aggregated without deducting any discounts, etc., which are offered by the operator per se. You would be deducting TDS at the rate of 1%. Now, a more refined illustration on this, taking care of certain practical aspects, is here. Let us say Amazon India is a resident e-commerce operator facilitating the sale of vendors, right? Now, the transactions which are done during the year are as follows. So there is a sale of around 2,000 lakhs which has taken place. There is a 10% discount which is offered by the commerce participant, that is the seller or the vendor. There is a 10% discount which is offered by the e-commerce operator as well. Right? So you have all those Amazon big sale days and flash sale, etc. So let's say there's a 10% discount which is offered by the operator as such. And there is a 10% commission which is charged by the e-commerce operator to the e-commerce participant. So now to determine what is the gross sale on which TDS has to be done, you have to consider only two things. One is the actual amount of sale as reduced by the discount which is offered by the participant, which is the vendor, which is the seller. We are not going to consider the payment of commission for the purpose of netting off of the gross sale amount. And we are also not going to consider the discount which is offered by the e-commerce operator. So on 1,800 lakhs, there'll be a TDS which is made at 1%, and Amazon India will have to pay 18 lakhs, deduct 18 lakhs by way of TDS and pay it to the government. So this is how the operationality of 194O is envisaged. Now there are certain guidelines which have come in the context of 194O. So for certain set of transactions or certain instances, 194O is not applicable. So I'll just run through that. Now, if you're carrying out any transactions through stock exchanges, so you never know, right? E-commerce is such a wide term that you also purchase and sell securities online. So they have, out of caution, excluded transactions which are carried out on recognized stock exchanges from the purview of 194O. Other than that, if at all there is any payment which is made to a payment gateway. So I'm sure most of us are aware that when we are buying certain things online, we are almost at times redirected to a payment gateway wherein which will be facilitating our payment, and then the transaction is complete. So in this case, the onus of deducting tax at source is on the e-commerce operator only. The payment gateway is just an intermediary. So whenever the e-commerce operator is under an obligation to deduct tax at source, naturally the payment gateway, which is merely facilitating the transaction, will not be under an obligation to do that. But they have specified it so that there's no difficulty wherein the revenue comes up with certain interesting analogies and says that payment gateway ko bhi TDS karna hai, like we had in the case of TCS, wherein those foreign remittances issue was concerned. There was a cascading effect which was later on rectified. So they have come out with this. And then for online sale of insurance and all also, the insurance agent or aggregator is not under an obligation. The TDS would there be the obligation of the insurance company responsible for selling insurance online. So these are some practical aspects we can keep a note of. Now, because I just looked at the definition of e-commerce operator in detail, correct? The reason was we already have something like equalization levy in place. Now, equalization levy is something which is, I would say we all popularly call it as Google tax. So it is one of the ways for taxing the implications of digitalized economy internationally. So India also has these provisions in place now. So there is some element of conflict or overlapping, I would say, which is prevalent between the provisions of Section 194O and equalization levy. Correct. So there have been a couple of non-resident e-commerce operators like eBay and I think Airbnb who have actually made representations that they should be given relief from the withholding tax mandate of 194O because they are covered by the equalization levy. But the status of those representations is unknown because there have been no corresponding amendments as such in the statute. So let us just have a quick, differentiation between the two legislative holdings which are there. First is who is liable to deduct and deposit tax. So under 194O, it is the e-commerce operator who is going to deduct it from the payment which is to be made to the participant and then pay it to the credit of the government. For equalization levy, e-commerce operator is liable to deposit it. So it is basically it is an expenditure for the e-commerce operator. I would like to put it that way. Now the e-commerce operator's residential status for 194O, it could be resident as well as non-residents. But for equalization levy, naturally only non-residents are covered. E-commerce participant under 194O regime is a resident. Compulsorily. Under the equalization levy, compulsorily it is a non-resident. Correct. So the vendor who's selling his products on the e-commerce platform, as far as applicability of the equalization levy is concerned, he's got to be only a non-resident. Customer could be anybody. He could be in India, outside India, resident, non-resident. We are not concerned. The rate of TDS is 1% for 194O, and for equalization levy, there are some different kinds of rate. The common one being 2%. I have put it the same in the chart. Also, Finance Act 2021 has made certain changes to the scope of equalization levy, but I would not really like to bring that in when we are discussing the TDS part of the statute. So we need to note that there are some changes to the scope, but they don't clarify anything in great detail. So the confusion still prevails. Okay. Fine. Now we move on to some other smaller aspects of the amendments which are there before we take up the predominant sections which are to be covered today. So there is a Q&A session at the end. So because I get the feeling that I'm speaking continuously on a monotonous basis. So anybody who has any questions which comes to your mind, maybe you can just put it somewhere in the Q&A part or whatever, so that you can ask them later. And okay, fine. Let us look at 194 section now. So as we all know, dividend distribution tax was abolished, correct? So they keep playing with DDT. If you just look at the history from 1990s, maybe every 3-4 years they bring it on, they abolish it. That goes on. So the moment the DDT aspect is gone, consequential amendment is that 194 gets reactivated. Correct. So now, because there is no dividend distribution tax to be paid by corporates, 194 is again active, which was TDS in respect of dividends on to shareholders. So the rate of TDS here is 10% for the dividend which is paid to resident shareholders in excess of 5,000 rupees, and the threshold is 2,000 if at all the dividend is paid in cash. Also, this is for shareholders who are non-residents. The rate of TDS is 20%, and this is covered by Section 195. But because we are discussing TDS on dividends, I've just brought in that part along with 194. Next is a small amendment which was made in 194A. I'm sure we are aware of it. There are two things actually. The threshold criteria 194A is interest other than interest on securities. So all this bank interest and post office interest, etc., would be covered under this section. So the threshold criteria for deductibility of TDS was raised, and this is again a Finance Act 2020 amendment, nothing new really, but among the recent ones, so I've kept it here. So it's 40,000 for non-senior citizens, and it is 50,000 in the context of senior citizens. Also, another change to this particular section was with respect to cooperative societies. So now, in respect of any cooperative societies which are making payments or allowing credit of interest to other cooperative societies, which is in excess of 50 crores in the preceding financial year, the turnover or gross receipts of these societies are in excess of 50 crores in the earlier financial year, then TDS will be applicable to these cooperative societies as well. So this is, I think, to cover all the sugar cooperative lobbies within the TDS bracket or so. It looks to have. So not very much practically relevant, at least we don't have many clientele like this. But yes, these thresholds being increased is a so I can see some questions, but I'll come to them in the Q&A. You all can keep posting them. Next is a small amendment having far-reaching effects as far as Section 194C is concerned. So 194C is with respect to TDS on contractors. Earlier, the definition of work, which is there in 194C, it did not include within its ambit any payment which is done for a work which is done using a material purchased by customers related party. So contractors related party, let us say it's a job work thing and there is a holding company, there is a subsidiary company. So the holding company is the contractee here. It is appointing, let us say, Mr. A as its contractor to carry out some job work, and the material which is to be used in the process of this is to be acquired from its subsidiary entity. So these cases were excluded from the levy of, I would say, from the ambit of TDS under 194C earlier. But now they have amended the definition of work, and they have said that TDS provisions will be applicable even in cases where material is purchased from the customer's related party. So even if the contractors, let's say contractees, holding company or any partner or any other firm where he has substantial interest, all those entities will now be considered as related party. The definition is same as in 40A2B, and accordingly TDS provisions will be applicable for those payments also. So people used to earlier find a way around the deductibility of TDS. Now that has been taken care of, I would say. Next is again a small amendment in 194J with some far-reaching effects. So let me give you a background. If we look at the provisions of 194J and maybe 194C, at times there is quite a lot of overlapping between the two. For example, if there is an AMC contract, which is a routine AMC contract for, let us say, my air conditioners or all the laptops and printers in my office. So I would say it is falling under the scope of 194C. However, if there is some complicated machinery or some complicated equipment which I'm using as a manufacturer, and I have given an AMC contract for its maintenance, I would again say that it would be a kind of a technical know-how or a technical skill set required, and therefore it comes within 194G. So this kind of overlapping has always been prevalent. So what used to happen was there was some element of services which were confusing whether they would be covered under 194C or whether they would be covered under 194J in the context of technical services. So people used to always take a safer route and deduct tax at 10% because as payers, we will always like to take the conservative approach. So then there was a lot of complaints that instead of 2%, TDS is being made at 10%. So to bring that anomaly to rest, the government said that TDS in respect of technical services other than professional services will be reduced from 10% to 2%. So now for these services which were overlapping between 194C and 194J, there is a parity of rate at 2%. So kidhar bhi TDS karo, it's okay, it's 2%, right? But now this has opened up another set of complexities. Because just like there's an overlap between C and technical services, there is an overlap between technical services and professional services also. So there are quite a few services which you don't know whether it's in the nature of FTS or whether you can take it as professional service. Until such point in time, we were relaxed because the rate of TDS for both was same. Now, when the rate of TDS for technical services is 2% and that for professional services is 10%, again they have opened up a Pandora's box here that whether we should be doing TDS at 2 or 10 for such services which are having a element of both. So this is one thing which has come out of the amendment, but can't really help. But this is the change which is there in 194G. Apart from this, TDS which is to be made on royalty for sale, distribution or exhibition of cinematographic films, etc. is also to be now deducted at the rate of 2%. So these are the changes as far as the other things of TDS, there is 194CJ, etc. are concerned. Now we look at 194P. And just give me a 1 minute break. All right. So this was again a section which was introduced by Finance Act 2021, which is section 194P. And I'm sure we all must still remember the budget speech wherein the Honorable Finance Minister made an announcement that for certain class of senior citizens, there was now no requirement to furnish or file their returns of income. And we all were very happy, but that happiness lasted only for a little while because the moment we got the fine print in hand and we actually read the conditions subject to which this non-filing of returns was envisaged, hardly a few handful would fit in that category. So this 194P, I would say, is a corollary of that 139(1) relaxation which is there because it covers those senior citizens and their specified income on which TDS is compulsory to have been made. And only when that criteria is met, they are given relaxation from furnishing of returns because all their taxes are accordingly paid. Now here, the payer is a specified bank. Now I would again like to just brace the participants that recently CBDT has given a notification clarifying what the specified bank is. So it's a banking company covered under the RBI definition, and also State Bank and all of its subsidiaries, etc. would be covered in this particular specified bank category. The payee in this case is a resident senior citizen whose age is 75 years or more in the previous year. The rates are the rates in force. So just like you deduct TDS in the context of salary, you are going to deduct TDS under 194P because the section is not specifying any rate of 1%, 5%, etc. Okay. threshold is also not specified, which naturally means that your basic exemption limit is your threshold. So the way I have understood these provisions is that it is akin to 192, wherein the specified bank is required to do a computation of your tax liability and then determine the amount of tax which is deductible. The time for deduction has also not been specified. So at the time of payment or credit, nothing has been still specified. So this is the basics of the section. Now, what are the conditions for deduction of tax? So basically, the income of the senior citizen should consist only of pension income and interest income, correct? Then this interest should be received in the account which is maintained with the specified bank. And the pension should also be received in that same bank. So typically it's a case like you receive your pension, you invested in that same bank and you receive interest on your FDs, etc. from the same bank again. And then the senior citizen is going to furnish some declaration with the prescribed particulars. Once all these conditions are specified, then this particular bank will do TDS at the specified, at the rates in force on your income. So this is the particular notification which I just referred to. We recently only it's come. So they have notified specified bank to mean a banking company or a scheduled bank appointed as agents of RBI, etc. So nothing great in this. I've just put in this for the sake of completeness. So this is the practical aspect, and one point we should notice: this section is applicable from 1st April 21, not like the other TDS provisions which were effective from July, etc. So there still seems to be some clarity required for this section with regards to when the TDS is required to be made, basically. All right. So now we'll just move on to 194Q and 206C1H. Okay. There are some questions, but we'll have a look at it later on. Okay. So this is the main thing for the day, I would say, which is caused a lot of turmoil amongst practicing CAs as well as entrepreneurs and businessmen alike, because the sections were introduced in such a manner that by the time we got used to one provision of TCS, we were bombarded with the TDS provisions, and then we actually fell into the trap of understanding which comes first and which comes second. So, before I begin my discussion for 194Q and 206C1H, which is with regards to TCS on sale of goods and TDS on purchase of goods, this is a tabulated distinction between the two provisions. So, being a teacher, it is always necessary for me to emphasize the provisions, because that is the base of everything. Unless we get that in our heads very clear, all other issues resolved to a great extent. So this is very interesting also. Let us see how they have drafted these two sections and what do the provisions typically bring out, what are the finer aspects involved. So when we speak of 194Q, which is with respect to TDS on purchase of goods, the person who is liable for deducting tax at source is the buyer. And in the context of TCS, which is again sale of goods, the person who is responsible for collecting tax at source is the seller. Now the turnover criteria is identical in both the sections. So there is a set turnover criteria of 10 crores. And the sections provide that you will be liable to collect or deduct TDS or TCS, as the case may be, only if in the immediately preceding year, your turnover is in excess of 10 crores. Right? In case of 194Q, you are required to look at the buyer's turnover. In case of 206C1H, you are required to look at the seller's turnover. The transaction criteria for each of the provision is also same, which is 50 lakhs. So your transaction for sale or purchase has to be beyond the threshold of 50 lakhs to be covered in the ambit of 194Q or 206C1H. The rate is also the same. amount on which tax is to be collected or deducted is in excess of 50 lakhs. So 50 lakhs in this sections operates like a basic exemption limit. It is not a threshold criteria per se, because the liability to deduct is only on the incremental amount and not like 194M, wherein the entire amount was to be considered, or in any of the other TDS sections as such also. Correct? And the most important point, which is going to be a very important factor to determine its applicability, is what is the time for collection or deduction. Now, if you look at 194Q, the trigger for deduction of TDS is at the time of payment or credit, whichever happens earlier. So far as 206C1H is concerned, the time for collection of TCS is at the time of receipt. Right? So this is what we should keep in mind. Now, after the introduction of section 194Q, the first preference has to be given to the TDS provision and not the TCS provision. So effective from 1st July 2021, if there is a situation where both these sections are operative, we will naturally be deducting TDS under 194Q because that is the section which gets the priority. Now let us look at some situations and how 194Q or 206C operates in this particular situation. So first case here is the buyer's details are given to us. If the turnover of the buyer in the preceding financial year is more than 10 crores and the purchase of goods is 50 lakhs or more, so we are fulfilling both the criteria of 194Q and 194Q will be applicable. Therefore, there will be no applicability of 206C1H as far as TCS mechanism is concerned. In the second situation, the buyer's turnover is more than 10 crores and the purchase transaction is less than 50 lakhs. Now, in this case, no TDS will be warranted because we are not fulfilling both the criteria of 194Q. Also, no TCS will also be required because my transaction value is less than 50 lakhs. So just like you have a trigger for purchase, for sale also the transaction value has to be in excess of 50 lakhs for TCS to come into picture. In the third situation, the turnover is less than 10 CR and the purchase is more than 50 lakhs. Correct? Now the buyer is not obligated to deduct tax at source because he is not compliant with the turnover criteria. But because the transaction value is in excess of 50 lakhs, we are bound to check whether the seller is liable to collect that tax at source. So in this third situation, if the seller's turnover in the preceding financial year is more than 10 CR, then he is under an obligation to collect tax at source. If the seller's turnover is also less than 10 CR, then again he is not fulfilling the criteria for 206C1H and there will be no requirement for collecting tax at source. In the last situation, if the turnover is also less than 10 CR and the purchase is less than 50 lakhs, there is no requirement for either 194Q or 206C1H. So all possible possibilities can be put in one of these four situations and accordingly you have to analyze. Just to bring more perspective to this discussion, if we add dates, this is how it would look. So as we all know, TCS was applicable from 1st October 2020 and TDS under 194Q is applicable from 1st of July 2021. So now to the same kind of situations, I have just added some dates which makes it more specific and understandable. So let us say the invoice date in a particular case is 30th June 21. The date on which the amount is credited by the buyer is also 30th June 21. So 194Q, the trigger is at the time of payment or credit, whichever is earlier. So your credit has already taken place, but it's taken place on 30th June 2021. Correct? So on this date, my 194Q was not in operation. So even though the payment is made in the month of July, I will be governed by the TCS provisions because as on the date of crediting the amount by the buyer, which is the trigger point for 194Q, that section is inoperative and therefore TCS provisions will be applicable. In the second case, my invoice date is 10th July 2021. The date on which the amount is credited by the buyer is also 10th July 21. But payment is, the date on which payment is made is 30th June 2021. So here the event of payment has preceded the event of credit. Correct? He must have paid in advance or whatever. Okay. So the payment which is made in the month of June, again at that point in time, my 194Q was inoperative because it's effective only from 1st July. So even though my invoice is dated in July, my credit in the books of accounts is in the month of July, since the payment has already happened in the month of June, it would also be covered by the TCS provision and not the TDS provision under 194Q. Great. Now let us look at the third instance. In this particular case, my invoice date is 30th of June 21. The date on which the amount is credited by the buyer is 8th of July. My payment is also made on 8th of July. Now 194Q nowhere talks of the invoice date. It just gives us one element for determining the trigger, which is payment or credit, whichever is earlier. So here on 8th July, it's being paid and credited, which means that 194Q was very much in operation when you credited or paid this amount. And subject to fulfilling other conditions, your TDS under 194Q will be attracted in this case because the TDS provision overrides the TCS provision. Likewise, my invoice date in the last case is 1st of July. My date on which the amount is credited is also 1st of July and my payment is made on the 15th of July. So here also on the date when the amount is credited, which is the trigger, my TDS provisions were on the statute book and therefore I will cover this transaction by TDS under 194Q because it's overriding my TCS provisions. So this is how the interplay between both these sections is there. This is a very simplistic, what I'd say, depiction of it. Of course, there are going to be a lot of issues. Some of them we are covering in the coming slides, but this is just to put the sections in a perspective. Now, when they brought in 206C1H provisions last year, they brought out a clarificatory circular about all the pertinent issues related to it, right? Similarly, they also came out with a circular in the context of 194Q just one day before the section was to be effective. I think practically on the 29th or 30th of June, that circular had come out. So now we'll discuss some issues, some of which have been resolved by the circular, some of which are still open, and some issues are resolved in such a way that we as professionals might not agree to the views given by the circular. So we'll go step by step. We'll first analyze the issues for 206C1H. Quite a lot of them would be relevant for 194Q, and then would again revisit the provisions and look at the issues. So those which are sorted, I will just clear them quickly. Now, 206C1H was applicable even in respect of advances. So the answer was yes. So anything which is received on or after 1st of October 2020, again up to 1st July 21, because then you have to check TDS applicability, it was covered under the ambit of TCS. Now, to determine the threshold criteria of 50 lakhs, sales for the initial 6 months were to be included. The circular clarified that there has to be no adjustment with regards to your sales, returns or discount. Whatever is the actual amount of invoice, that is the amount which should be the base for collecting your TCS. So usually your discount, etc. would be adjusted only, and the trigger for TCS is receipt. So what you receive is the base for your TCS. So if you receive your consideration net of all these things, it is any which way is taken care of. Many businessmen, just for the sake of convenience, actually paid the TCS amount on invoice basis also. That is without waiting for the actual consideration to flow in. There were quite a lot of these issues which we tackled last year. So see, in those cases, because you are not abiding by what the trigger for TCS provision is, then naturally it becomes difficult to reduce any kind of discount or sales return from that, because you're actually paying the TCS on invoice basis. So it was always recommended that you pay the TCS only on receipt of your consideration from the buyer. Also, the circular clarified that for TCS, there would be no adjustment for any kind of indirect taxes from the amount on which TCS was to be made. So, a conservative view was adopted by most professionals that you have to include the GST element within your sale consideration and then deduct the TCS. Then pay the TCS. But a contrary view also exists. There are still people who say that TCS is technically not required to be made on GST. But if you look at the rate and if you look at the players who would be really affected by these provisions, people don't want hassles. So they are collecting tax at source inclusive of the IDT component. Now let us look at 194Q as the section is. So here, where the buyer is responsible for paying sum to any resident. Again, the seller here has to be resident. The buyer, no specific criteria for the residential status has been specified. On the value or aggregate value of goods exceeding 50 lakhs in any previous year, the buyer is liable to deduct tax and source at the time of payment or credit, whichever is earlier, at 0.1% on the amount exceeding 50 lakhs. This is what the provision says. Now we pick up some common issues. The first and foremost is both the sections, if you see, they talk about deductibility or collectibility of tax on sale or purchase of goods. But nowhere in these sections or in the entire Income Tax Act as such has the term goods been defined. So this opens up a very big question that what exactly are goods for the purpose of applicability of these two sections. So when we don't have any definition under the Income Tax Act, we would prefer to look at some similar statutes giving out the meaning. So most would be what is goods under GST Act or what is goods under Sale of Goods Act, etc. Correct. So this is just a chart. Most other things are clear. So anything which is marketable, which is capable of being sold in the open market is goods, right? It has to be movable because both the statutes specifically exclude immovable properties from the purview of goods. But what happens to shares and securities? So here I would like to take support of the circular which was introduced in context of 206C1H also and in the context of 194Q also. So in both the cases they have said that wherever there are any sale of shares and securities through through recognized stock exchanges, those kind of transactions are excluded. So this puts up a picture like this. You could be a dealer in shares and securities, wherein these shares and securities comprise your stock in trade, or you could be an investor. If you're an investor, these things represent your assets and they don't represent your stock. So you're outside the purview of both of the sections any which ways. If you're a dealer in shares and securities, and if you are dealing in listed shares and securities which are liable to STT, then you can take support of the circular and you can say that, okay, shares and securities which are sold or traded from recognized stock exchanges are excluded. But the circular doesn't state anything about what happens to sale or trading in unlisted shares and securities. So that also might form a sizable chunk of a trader, and that would still, to my mind, be covered under the meaning of the term goods, because the specific exclusion which has been made is only in the context of listed shares. So for a dealer, unlisted shares and securities could be within the ambit of goods, both for the purpose of 194Q also and for the purpose of 206C1H as well. Next aspect with regards to goods, which I need to highlight, is whether software and other intangible assets like copyrights or whatever would be covered within the meaning of the term goods. So the answer, the plain vanilla answer which I would like to give here is yes, because goods has not been defined and software, etc., is something which is easily sold in the market. Tangibility or intangibility as such has no implication with regards to classifying a particular item as goods. So yes, sale of software would also be covered both under the ambit of 194Q also and 206C 1H also. However, this is not so simple as I have made it out to be. There are a lot of things which we need to understand from the perspective of what kind of software it is which is being sold. Is it customized or is it something which is available over the counter money? It is similar for everybody who is acquiring it. So those are the finer nitty-gritties which one has to look into before you actually reach a conclusion that software is covered within the meaning of the term goods. So there is some, I think, there is some landmark ruling in the case of TCS, I believe, which we need to look into it. But yes, on a simplistic note, software would be covered under the term goods. The next aspect which I want to cover here is in the context of 206C 1H, which is TCS on sale of goods. Now, practically just, talk one or two sentences away from the topic per se. When I was a student or even when I was teaching tax, I never really paid attention to the TCS provisions which had TCS on sale of scrap and liquor and Tendu leaves and so many other things which are there in 206 other parts, But when 206C 1H was introduced, it sort of compelled me to go and look at what the other provisions of the statute stated. So if you look at the other provisions of 206, what they say is if the sale of goods is for is a part of a B2B transaction. So let us say the purchaser is going to use the goods for his own further manufacturing activities. Then the TCS provisions don't require you to collect tax at source for some of the other aspects of TCS. But a similar carve-out is absent in the context of 206C 1H. So supposing I am dealing, let us say, in some chemicals, right? And I'm fulfilling the threshold criteria. There is a purchaser, Mr. A, who acquires it from me, and Mr. A is going to use these chemicals in his own manufacturing activities. Had it been any other TCS provision which of the nature I mentioned earlier, I would not be under an obligation to collect tax at source from the purchase made by Mr. A because he was not the end consumer. Right? But such kind of carve out is absent in the way the provisions are presently worded for 206C 1H. So that is one thing I wanted to highlight. Next is what is the status of goods which are sold to SEZ units or EOU units, whether they are liable for TCS or for that matter even TDS. So why it becomes important is because these SEZ units or EOU units are given the status of export, correct? So any sale which is made to them from other than SEZ areas is technically treated as an import. And 206C 1H excludes goods which are imported out of India from from collection of TCS. But when we look at SEZ or EOU units and when we evaluate the wordings used in the section which say imported out of India, there is a underlying condition that those goods have to go out of India. Whereas in case of sale to SEZ and EOU units, technically the goods are just sold within India only to an entity which is being given the status of an export unit. So yes, TCS and TDS will be applicable in respect of such sale also. The next point is again a very important question, just like the question as to what goods was, is how do we define turnover? When issues like these arise, it sometimes makes me think that why are such basic things not defined in the statute books, right? As a reader or as a student of law, one would always like clarity. But then the professional in me tells me that had everything been defined in the statute, what would be our need? So that is how we come into picture, right? We have to interpret things. So how would one look at the meaning of the term turnover, which is used in both the sections, 194Q as well as 206C1H? Now, the term turnover basically is not defined anywhere in the Income Tax Act, right? And it doesn't find its definition in any of the other acts also per se. One section which refers to it often is that 44AB, which has that threshold criteria with respect to tax audit provisions. Now, turnover could be on your inclusive basis or it could be on exclusive basis, wherein I mean that you could account for your turnover including your indirect taxes or excluding it. Now we have a guidance note which is given by ICAI on 44AB, which gives a very good description about what turnover is in the context of that particular section. And to my mind, it always advocates for the inclusive method, which is also what is routinely adopted as a way of accounting by most entities. So when we are determining turnover for the purpose of applicability of these two sections with regards to deciding as to 10 crores or 50 lakhs criteria is fulfilled or not, to my mind, your indirect tax component should also be considered when you're determining this 10 crore threshold for the earlier year. That is the conclusion which I have managed to reach, but it is not free from doubt because there could be divergent views, but the popular view seems to be this. Right. Same way, gross receipts, sales, etc. also are not defined, which is fine. We need to understand them in the common parlance of the term. But what we need to pay attention here is both the sections say gross receipts, sales, or turnover from business. So technically, you need not include any other receipts which the assessee might have earned during the year, which don't have a direct nexus with his or her business activities. Correct. So if there's let's say some sale of some capital asset, or there's some other receipt which is maybe nothing to do with your business per se, or windfall gain, etc. So those you need not bring into the ambit of gross receipt, sale, or turnover for the purpose of determining your threshold criteria. So these were some things from the earlier circular and issues which were there around it. Now some important aspects for 194Q. I'm assuming that my pace and speed is okay. If there is anything to be changed on that front, please let me know. It's very difficult to talk on an online session without seeing faces of the people who are bearing you. Okay, so coming to 194Q, it's not applicable in certain cases where other TDS sections are applicable. So, like I said, maybe there is, let us say, 194O or something like that, wherein there is sale of goods where some other TDS section is coming into picture. So then 194Q is not going to be applicable. Also, for all the other TCS sections, other than 206C1H, all the other TCS sections, they get precedence. Okay, they would not be covered by 194Q. But 206C1H and 194Q gets the priority. Now, if the seller is not furnished his PAN, then buyer is required to deduct TDS at the rate of 5%. This section is already in force from 1st of July 2021. And we discussed the interplay of 206C1H vis-a-vis 194Q. Now, some issues resulted out of 194Q, which I would like to bring up. In that, we'd also cover some practical aspects also alongside. Now, whether purchases which were made from April 21 to June 21 should be included to determine the threshold of 50 lakhs. So the answer here is yes. On the same analogy as last year's circular, plus if you want a legal background for it, the terminology which is used is for the year, threshold for the year, correct? So you have to look at the entire April onwards period, even though the section effective is from 1st of July. whether non-resident buyer is liable to TDS, deduct TDS on purchase from resident sellers. So the answer is no, and it is covered in the circular. I've taken up the fine points of the circular in the next slide, so we'll revisit this one. Now, friends, the most important point of 194Q, which is absent from 206C1H, is the disallowance implication. See, not deducting TDS at 0.1% is one implication, but getting your aggregate purchases on which TDS was deductible disallowed is a very dangerous implication. So if you look at the provisions of 40A1A, some years back, this disallowance section used to refer only to certain sections from chapter 17B. So it used to say that where TDS was deductible and not deducted in the context of 194J, C, H, I, etc. But some years prior, the wordings of this section are now changed. That clause is now worded to mean that wherever TDS was deductible under the provisions of chapter 17B and has not been deducted. So the worst implication of 194Q to my mind is the disallowance which one would have to face under 40A1A. Right. So one question which comes up here is, what would be the amount of disallowance? For example, 194Q is applicable only for incremental amount of purchases in excess of 50 lakhs. So just to put a simple numerical figures, let's say Mr. A has purchased goods worth 70 lakhs from Mr. B. Correct. Now he is under an obligation to deduct tax at source on the 20 lakh component because there is a sort of exemption up to 50 lakhs criteria. So on this 20 lakhs amount, he is not deducted TDS. One implication is, of course, the interest and penalty under TDS chapters which will follow. But another implication is there will be a disallowance of the purchase expenditure. Now, the question is whether the entire 70 lakhs should be allowed. Should be disallowed, or only the 20 lakhs component, 30% should be disallowed. So if you look at the wordings of 40A1A, they state that TDS was deductible and has not been deducted. So the base on which TDS was deductible was only the 20 lakh amount. Correct? We were never liable to deduct TDS on the first 50 lakhs. We were liable to deduct TDS only on such amount which was crossing 50 lakhs. Correct? So to my mind, the base for disallowance would be 20 lakhs, being the consideration in excess of 50 lakhs, and 30% of that would be disallowed. So that would be the a very big 6 lakh disallowance for you for not deducting tax at a mere 0.1%. So this is one aspect which we need to be aware of and which we need to educate our clients also, that not complying with TDS is one aspect, but in your computation, this is going to be the implication. Right? All right. This also brings me to another question. I don't know how many of you present here got this question last year around when TCS provisions came. I'm sure all must have deliberated on it. So this 50 lakhs, which threshold criteria is there, has it to be checked every year, every party? Or is it, once a person crosses that threshold of 50 lakhs, uske baad every year you are liable to do TCS or TDS? So to my mind, this 50 lakhs has to be seen every year because it says any previous year. Now that any previous year is only the reason why people have different views, because people at times interpret any previous year to mean that ek baar aapne 50 lakhs cross kar liya, then you are going to be lifetime responsible for collecting or deducting tax at source wherever that same party is concerned. However, another equally strong interpretation is that any previous year means you got to check it for every year in question. So I go by the view that 50 lakhs threshold criteria is to be checked for every year. So suppose you have 10 parties to whom you are selling goods, and out of those 10, for 5 you have crossed the threshold of 50 lakhs in 1 year. You would not be under an automatic obligation to deduct tax for the next year automatically. You will have to see whether in that year also you are crossing the threshold of 50 lakhs. That is the way I have chosen to interpret it. There could be opposite views. Coming to the aspect on purchase returns, it is covered in the circular, so I'm not discussing it over here. The GST aspect is also there in the next slide. The circular has given some guidance around it. I don't quite agree to it, but let's deliberate upon it. Next aspect is whether TDS is to be deducted in respect of capital goods. So like I told you, because goods has not been defined over here, it is really interesting to understand as to what all can actually come within the ambit of these TDS or TCS provisions. So one factor here is capital goods. So if I'm purchasing some machinery or I'm purchasing some equipment, some plant, what would be the implication if I'm crossing the threshold of 50 lakhs? Because for someone who has a turnover of 10 crores in a financial year, 50 lakhs is not a very material amount. And if he acquires some fixed asset of that range, whether he is liable to deduct TDS. Now my answer here would be yes. For TDS perspective, because the section has not given any kind of hint as to goods is restricted just to your stock in trade or non-capital goods or circulating goods. So even machinery and fixed assets come within the definition of goods as far as your GST law or your Sale of Goods Act is concerned. So under income tax mechanism, I would be obligated to deduct tax at source in respect of capital goods as well. Now, if you ask me what would be my answer if it was a TCS provision in the context of capital goods, then I would have a different view here. And my different view is something with the way the section is placed in the statute book. So if at all you ever have time to go and check what is the heading of the chapter in which 206C is placed. Right now, 206C is placed with a heading which speaks about receipts from profits and gains of business. Correct? So, to my mind, it presupposes a condition that whatever you are selling has to be a part of your business, has to be a part of your stock. Whereas when you're selling some, if you're a seller of capital goods and machinery, then so be it. But if you're just selling it as a one of a case, maybe a second-hand machinery which you're selling to a other entity or something like that, then capital goods is not covered within the ambit of TCS provisions, but it is covered within the ambit of TDS provisions. That is what my study of the subject tells me. There could be different views about it, but this is what my logic has helped me understand, right? Okay, the next question is whether purchases made from a single seller from different locations or units have to be aggregated. So my answer is yes, because this entire exercise is operating qua PAN. You might have different tax account numbers for ease of your TDS compliances or your GST compliances. So one unit is located in Maharashtra, the other one is located in Kerala, or the other one is in Tamil Nadu. So all that is fine. But ultimately, if the assessee is having one unified PAN, all the purchases made to that single PAN have to be aggregated to determine the threshold. Whether TDS is to be made from payments in respect of transactions in electricity, the answer here is no. And this has been rightfully clarified by the circular which came in, which we are going to discuss in the next slide. So prior to this clarification came in, there were a lot of issues about whether payments of electricity would also be liable for TDS, but TCS, when they had upheld the logic and the same reasoning they have given it TDS also. Applicability to seller whose income is exempt. Again, if a person's income is not taxable by virtue of maybe section 10 or some other provisions, they're talking of exempt income only. They're not talking of instances wherein your income is deductible and by virtue of that you have a nil income. Okay, so if your income is exempt, then there is no requirement for TDS as such. The next question here is purchase of jewelry, whether it would be liable for TDS under 194Q. Now, you would be questioning as to why have I brought this jewelry perspective here. So normally as a part of your personal investments, if you acquire jewelry, certainly it is not a part of your business. So I don't think that would really attract TDS. But you know, we have this practice in our country wherein if there is any festival or if there is some anniversary or some opening of the business, we have this practice of giving bullion, maybe a silver coin or something to the employees or our business associates. So just to give you an example, if there is Diwali around the corner and I have made good business this year, so I decide to give some 5-gram silver coins across the board to everybody, employees as well as clients, etc. And I make this bulk purchase of such coins and the amount crosses 50 lakhs. Would it still be necessary for me to deduct TDS? So now they have not given any specific exclusion. There is no other section dealing with jewelry as we had in the case of TCS, wherein there was clarifications which came out, but here you would be under an obligation to deduct tax at source, even if what you have purchased is jewelry and if you are fulfilling the other criteria. Okay, so now we move on to certain aspects from the circular which came in on June 30th. I mean, it came around somewhere around 28th or 29th of June, just because before the section was to be effective. So let us discuss some important aspects from this. I'm sure this will clarify a lot of things. First and foremost, the circular states that 194Q is not going to be applicable in respect of transactions in securities and commodities which are done through recognized stock exchanges, including those which are located in IFSC. So then that chart which I had depicted for goods, so wherever there is an STT paid transaction, that is outside the purview of TDS as well as TCS. Transactions in electricity, renewable energy, etc., or where you are trading certificates through power exchanges has also been held to be excluded from 194Q's applicability. This threshold criteria I already discussed. Purchases for the period from April to June will be covered for determining your TDS applicability. Now let's understand how the circular has put the GST aspect in perspective. So what the circular says is it distinguishes instances of deducting TDS based on credit and deducting TDS based on payment. And the circular states if TDS is done because your amount is being credited to the seller's account in terms of your agreement or contract and the GST amount is indicated separately, then your TDS has to be made on the amount credited without including GST, right? So at the time of credit in your invoice or as per your agreement, if you are indicating your GST amount separately, only then you are eligible to deduct TDS on the consideration aspect exclusive of GST. If it is included and you are given one singular amount, then you are liable to deduct tax at source on the entire amount without making any distinction for the GST component. Second aspect is if the liability to deduct TDS is attracted because of payment which is being made, correct? In this case, wherein TDS under 194Q is made on the payment to the seller, and because payment is earlier than credit, TDS has to be made on the whole amount, because then they say that bifurcation becomes difficult. So to avoid that, you deduct TDS on the entire amount. So if you are making any advance payments to your sellers, right, and abhi tak you have not actually credited it in your books of accounts, in those cases, you would be required to deduct TDS on the entire component without excluding GST. But if you are crediting it first and then later on paying it, then you can exclude GST so long as your invoice separately indicates the amount of GST. Now, this is the guidance which has been given by the circular, but I don't quite agree with the differential treatments with regards to what happens when TDS is deducted on credit or what happens when TDS is deducted on payment. But this is the way we have to actually be compliant with the provisions. Some more aspects. This is with regards to purchase returns, correct? Now TDS is to be made at the time of payment or credit. So there will be instances that tax is already deducted on the amount of purchase return. Correct. In this case, what is to be done is if the amount is refunded by the seller, then this amount of TDS can be adjusted against the next purchase made by the same seller. So what they say is, unlike in TCS, if there is any sales return, you usually get the receipt after excluding the amount of sales return. But in case of purchases, you're already deducting TDS at the time of credit, and later on, if some amounts are treated as a refund on account of purchase return, you will be able to adjust that amount of TDS against the subsequent purchase. Now, some people had raised issues here also. They said that what if I don't have a subsequent transaction with the seller? In that case, what is the recourse? Then the only recourse is to wait for that TDS to reflect and then accordingly take the credit in at the time of filing your returns. Because other than that, there is no other mechanism developed per se. And it could be a possibility that it could be a one-time transaction and you don't really have any other transaction with the same seller. Okay. If the purchase return is replaced with goods by the seller, then there's no question of any adjustments because there's no element of any refund envisaged in this. Now, this is a clarification with regards to non-residents. This particular provisions are not applicable to a non-resident who is purchasing goods from seller who is resident in India, and such purchase is not connected with the PE of the non-resident. Further, 194Q is also not applicable if the seller's income is entirely tax exempt and will apply only where the seller's income is partly exempt. So this clarity also the circular has handed out. Now, these were the points which were pertaining to 194Q and 206C1H basically. There are some other issues which are there in my mind, which I would just like to bring out. And of course, then there would be some other newer issues which the participants would certainly throw up. So first thing is, what would happen if it is the first year of business with respect to a seller or a buyer? What would be the recourse if it's the first year of business? Now, why this becomes important is because one of the threshold criteria talks of turnover of 10 crore or less in the earlier years. Right now, there is no earlier PY here because this is my first year. So 194Q circular has given the clarity that if it is your first year of operation, then 194Q would not be applicable because there's no mechanism to understand what is the turnover in the preceding financial year. So that is one thing which I wanted to highlight. Other than that, I think most of the things which did come to my mind, I have put them or I have discussed. The disallowance part was certainly something we should all take note of. Okay, one possible question, which over the time interacting with people has come to my mind is 40A1A has a proviso which tells us that if the recipient of income has filed his return of income and he has included that amount in his computation, paid the tax thereon, and got a CA certificate to the effect that this tax has already been remitted, then there is no disallowance to be made to the payer. That is one proviso to 40A1A. Now, one natural question which would come here in the context of 194Q is, what if the seller has collected the tax at source and he has paid it? Would I still be cushioned from the disallowance under 40A1A? Can I take that support that by seller has already done the TCS component, even though I failed in my obligation to deduct tax at source, and I am ready to pay the interest and penalty under TDS mechanism, but please save me from the disallowance perspective? So to my mind, it would be a little far stretched to take the question of TCS payment against the disallowance under 40A1A in absence of any express provision. But let us see with passage of time how the law develops, because ultimately the goal of TDS and TCS provision is to ensure earlier collection of taxes. So whether the buyer deducts it or the seller collects it, government's idea of collecting it in time has happened. So unnecessarily the buyer should not be penalized with a disallowance to my mind. But let's see how the provision spans out in the time to come. So yes, with this I will go on to the last part of the presentation today, which is again a very important and a very, if I use a Hindi word, it's a very khatarnak section which we all need to take note of. And it is in the context of higher rates of TDS and TCS in the case of non-filers of return of income. So this is literally a draconian provision which has come into the statute book. And it is certainly going to be litigative. We can almost feel it. So just to give you a brief background, we discussed the proviso to 194N at the beginning of the session almost, which provided different rates and thresholds for non-filers of return of income. So now they have brought in a whole new section which speaks of what will be the repercussions with regards to all the TDS and TCS sections if you are not compliant with your return filing obligations. So the special persons who are covered here are called as non-filers because they have not furnished their return of income in 2 immediately preceding years prior to the year in which the tax is deducted or collected. Yeah, just a reference point here I would like to clarify. My slide mentions only of 206 AB. There is a corresponding TCS section which is 206 CCA also. It is similar, so I've just discussed 206 AB here. Now I'll tell you the background of why these provisions would have come into picture. Earlier they wanted everybody to have PAN, correct? So they brought in 206A and they said that if you're not quoting PAN in your transactions, you will be subjected to a higher TDS rate. And slowly over time, people started getting used to the provisions of 206AA and they ensured that everybody had a PAN. Now their statistics tells them that many people have PAN, but only a fraction full of them actually furnish their returns of income. So the next step of legislation which they have brought in is to ensure that everybody who has a PAN also furnishes their return of income. That is this is the stick that they are showing to them. So now they're saying that if you have not furnished your return of income in the preceding 2 previous years, pertaining to the previous year in which your TDS or TCS is to be done, and your aggregate amount of TDS or TCS in each of the 2 years is in excess of 50,000, then you will be subjected to higher rates of TDS and TCS. And this section is effective from 1st of July 2021. So we all must have been subjected to or must have been a part of teams advising our clients that you please take declarations from your vendors or you take declarations from so and so people that they have furnished their returns of income, etc. Because now they have introduced a functionality to check that. But prior to it, when this section was just introduced, we never knew how to comply with this, ensuring this that actually the person has complied with his return filing obligations. Okay, so this kind of declarations have floated in. We all have received them. We all have sent them. That is as a mean to ensure that return compliance has been done. Now, what is the implication of the TDS rates which have been prescribed? So the TDS rates here would be twice the rates which is specified in the relevant provision, twice the rates which are in force, or at a rate of 5%, whatever is higher. So wherever 10% is being prescribed, it will be 20 that you will compare with 5, whatever is higher, that is the rate at which you will be required to do TDS. In addition to this, they say that if PAN has also not been furnished, you have to deduct the TDS in accordance with the rate under 206 AA or AB, whichever is higher. Now I'll just explain that with this chart here. So 206 AA basically talks of higher of the 3, which is rate specified in the section, rates in force or a higher rate at 20%. Correct? 206 AB gives you twice the rate in the provision, twice the rate in force, and 5%. So if a person is not furnishing his PAN and he's also not furnished his return of income, his TDS will be done at higher of A and B, whatever the case may be. And I'll tell you, for those of us who are interested in analyzing the legal language which is in use, both 206 AB and AA are non-obstante provisions. Both begin with notwithstanding anything contained in other provisions, so and so. So usually when you're dealing with two non-obstante clauses, only one operates. You can't have both these sections coming into picture. However, 206 AB, when they brought in, they have specifically provided in that section that if 206 AA is applicable, then tax deduction will be made at the higher rate. So they want to just anyhow ensure compliance with both your PAN as well as return filing status. That is the analogy between 206 AA and AB. Now, there are certain payments which are excluded from this. So your list of exclusions is your salary payments, payments out of accumulated PF balances, winning from lottery, crossword puzzles, etc., income from investment and securitization trust, and cash withdrawals under 194N. These are the list of exclusions from applicability of 206 AB. Now, this is a chart which I have just included in my slides, which could be a ready reference or kind, but I'll just give you the gist of it. What it says is for you to be a non-filer or for you to be a specified person in terms of 206 AB, two cumulative conditions have to be fulfilled. First condition is that you should not have filed returns for both of the two preceding previous years. Relation to the year in which your tax is to be deducted or collected. And the second condition is that your total of TCS or TDS, what was to be deducted or collected in each of the 2 years, should be in excess of 50,000. Right? Once these two criteria is met, then only you're a specified person or a non-filer. One of this is not met for either of the years, then you're not hit by 206 AB. So this chart will just help you do a yes, no kind of a thing. You can just take a print and maybe put it so that it's easier for the staff to understand. Now, what are the implications of 206 AB? Naturally, it is a Herculean burden in terms of compliance because every vendor, every purchaser, every service provider is now under an obligation either to submit his compliance with the conditions of this section or to check for compliance with this section in respect of the payments which he is making. They have provided a functionality for it. Some days back only it has come. Personally, till now, I have not used it. Neither have I got any reports from colleagues who have used it. But it is a PAN-based utility. You can key in the PAN numbers and check the return filing status. That is something which they have done. Apart from that, the section is not really a welcome move. So I'm sure many people at various forums would have already thought of challenging it in some way or the other once we get free from the faceless assessments backlashing that is happening. So then all these issues will come into the limelight. So these are one or two things. And yeah. One thing which I want to just discuss here is this 50,000 criteria which is there, no? That your total TCS and TDS has to be checked for to be more than 50,000. Now, would this be qua payer or would this be qua the aggregate amount of TCS or TDS for a particular person? So my view here is, and also with the support of functionality which came in to check the status, my view here is this 50,000 has to be checked qua the person who is deducting tax at source. So for example, let us say Mr. A, I'm appointing Mr. A as my consultant and I'm paying him some professional fees. So I have to check whether aggregate payment, sorry, not quad deductor, qua the payee who is receiving it. So I have to see if the aggregate amount of TDS which Mr. A is receiving is in excess of 50,000 in the year, then I will be classifying him as a non-filer. Otherwise, I would not. So this 50,000 threshold, to my mind, is for the aggregate TDS or TCS, which is to be deducted from all sources, not just me. Okay, I hope I've been able to put that across clearly. Yes. So this is about 206 AB, and I think I've covered most of the things which I had planned for the day. I'll just try and look at the questions part. Yes, Deepa, ma'am, what would you advise me to do?
Yeah, there's one question in the Q&A tab so far.
Okay,
Are you able to view it?
I'll just check, ma'am.
Yeah, it's next to the chat.
Yeah, I can see it.
I can read it out for you.
Yeah, it's just partially visible to me.
Yeah, okay, it says 194M is applicable to individual or HUF. In case a business which is a partnership firm having less than 1 crore turnover, whether any TDS provisions are applicable.
I think it'll help me more if I view the question. I'll just try and
Yeah, I'll just read it once more. 194M is applicable to individual or HUF. I think that's more intended as a question. So 194M, is it applicable
to both individual and HUF? It is applicable in cases where the individual and HUF is not required to deduct TDS under any other sections of 194C, J, etc.
Okay. And the next part of the question is, in case a business which a partnership firm having less than 1 crore, whether any TDS provisions are applicable.
Acha. So, okay, so 194M, so what the question is, I think, is whether partnership firm, if it is not covered by tax audit threshold, whether it is covered under 194M. So yes, 194M covers all sorts of payers, and the criteria for individual and HUF is only when they are not covered under other provisions. So partnership firm, to my mind, would not be affected by 194M as such.
The second question which is come is TDS under section 194C is already deducting at the rate of.
This I can view in the chat box. Yeah, TDS under 194C is already deducted at 1%. Whether TDS under 194Q, no. Then 194Q would not be required, because 194Q makes it clear that if we are required to deduct TDS under any other provisions, then 194Q would not be applicable.
Ma'am, so if you can wait for another minute in case somebody wants to
yes,
ask a question. Yeah. Members, in case any of you want to raise any queries, please write to us on the Q&A box. I don't think there are any other questions. Joe sir, would you want to give any closing remarks?
Deepa, it was a wonderful session, Ms. Prachi Parekh.
Thank you.
Definitely, yes, we really had a good time of learning of various provisions of TDS. So, but there are no more queries. I think queries are very less. Maybe, it's cleared all their doubts.
Maybe they have understood it, or maybe they have not understood at all.
Yeah, but no, we cannot say we don't have it. We don't understand, but definitely that may be the reason.
Joseph,
yeah, one more question has come. Yes, please.
I raised a question on 194M just to confirm that in case of an individual, 194M is applicable. But in case of partnership firm, which is not having any tax audit, no TDS provision is applicable.
Yes. Just give me a second still. I just read out the bare wordings to them.
Sure.
So 194M covers only a person who is an individual or HUF. So even if it is a partnership firm, then it is not covered in the scope of 194M. So technically, the participant who's asking the question is correct because just we have something in the form of 194M to take care of the lacuna where individual is not required to deduct tax at source if he's outside 194C. There is no similar provision right now for firms. So there could be, but to my mind, 194C, if you see, right, that the only distinction made by 194C is in the context of individuals and HUFs for being compliant with the tax audit threshold. Any other assessee who is liable to deduct tax at source, there is no condition that he has to have turnover in excess of tax audit limits. So the partnership firm would be liable to deduct tax under 194C only. I hope I'm able to clarify. Individuals and HUFs are only outside 194C if they don't have their threshold in excess of tax audit limits. All other assessees are any which ways covered in 194C. The exclusion, so even if a firm is having 1 crore turnover, which is maybe less than 44 AB limits, it would still be covered in 194C. We would not really need any other provision for that.
I think, ma'am, I think he's clear. He said, okay, madam, thank you. One more question has come. In case of filing TDS return for 194Q, should we refer bill number by each bill or can we file total purchase for month-wise, for each month-wise?
Oh, this would be a compliance-based question, which I would not be having too much of a bandwidth to deal with, but I believe a total amount would suffice unless there is anything contrary in the rules which come along for compliance.
I think 194Q, we usually file with a total value for purchases for each
Total
client.
monthly, that is what I am aware of.
Right. So in absence of any further questions, I think I should take this opportunity to thank CA Prachi Parekh. The teacher in you really came out shining, ma'am. The way you were explaining the provisions, each nuances of it with examples, that was extremely useful for all the participants. I'm sure everybody has gained from the presentation that you have done. I hope you will be sharing your presentation with us.
Yes.
We will be uploading it on our site so that the participants can view it and any other member also can view it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for joining us from Mumbai. I hope that sometime that you will ensure that you come here. We will definitely be inviting you. I hope you can come down and see God's own country and take sessions for us in person. Thank you so much for joining us this time.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, dear participants, once again for joining us in large numbers. I think more people joined, in addition to the number who had actually registered for the session. They've joined in and I'm sure they've all benefited from the session. Anaclam Grant's next program will be on digital platform and that will be again on 28th. That is the coming Tuesday. We hope to see you all there. Thank you once again. This is Anaclam Grant signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Thank you.